Let's bring in our Jamie Yuccas, CBS News correspondent, who has been covering this story. And Jamie, I think a lot of people just need to be reminded about the basic outlines of this case, because this is a case that happened in more than 400 days since the death of Tamir Rice, 12 years old. It was November 22nd, 2014. When a call came in to 911 dispatchers about someone in the park with a gun. Remind us of what transpired.
Well, and what's interesting about that, Elaine, is that is almost the first outline of human error in this case, because the 911 caller did say that he believed that the assailant, rather the suspect, Tamir Rice, was a juvenile. Also said that they believed that the gun could be fake, but they weren't sure. But that was never relayed to the officers in this case. So the officers came up into an area of West Cleveland, which is known to be a little bit rougher in some parts of that town, came up on the recreation center where Tamir Rice was. And as you can see in the surveillance video that's been widely circulated both on the internet and through news reports, you can see Tamir Rice at the recreation center, the police cruiser speed up. You then see that rookie officer, Mr. Lohman, get out of the vehicle and almost immediately shoot Tamir Rice. Now, I think this is really where the questions started being raised by both the family of Tamir Rice and the officers. The officers' point of view, as Mr. McGinty said in the press conference a few moments ago, is that the officers feared for their life. They believed that Tamir was going into his waistband and about to pull out what they believed was a real gun, turned out to be a replica. The family, though, I've talked to the family's attorney several times, and they say that if you take a look at this video, to them and their experts, which they ended up submitting to the grand jury as well, that their experts believe that Tamir may have been shot so quickly that it was his reaction to being shot is when his arms go up, and possibly the reaction from the bullets hitting him, that the sweatshirt kind of lifts up in a manner. So I think that's really the difference of opinion between the officers saying that they were fearful, they thought he was reaching for a gun that they believed to be real, and the family saying, no, wait a minute, this happened so quickly that this is the reaction to him being shot. His shoulder goes up, his hand goes back, and his sweatshirt reveals part of his stomach.
And there we see, this is the thing that the prosecutor was pointing out, how similar the replica looked to an actual handgun, a Colt-type handgun, but this was a pellet gun that, as we understand it, Jamie, correct me if I'm wrong, the orange tip, which is sort of the marker that this is not a real gun, had been removed from the gun that Tamir Rice was holding.
It had, and I would think that's probably another indication that the county prosecutor is talking about in terms of human error. Tamir and his friends had been playing with this gun. Apparently the orange tip had been removed, so that came into question then immediately. Is this a real gun or is it not? Now, some people at the park, when they did call 911, said it may be a pellet gun or an airsoft gun, a fake gun. But as you can see from these pictures, they do look very similar if you don't have that orange tip visible.
Let's bring in, along into this conversation, David Di Pietro, who is a trial attorney who's been listening in as the prosecutor was holding his news conference. I just want to get your take on this, David, because we heard the prosecutor say, you know, this was horrible, unfortunate, tragic, the death of Tamir Rice, but it was not by the law that binds us a crime. I think from a legal perspective, what may be a little bit confounding and confusing for some people is that when you hear a prosecutor say this was a perfect storm of human error, and yet there is no criminal culpability, what is your take on what we heard today about the grand jury declining to return any charges against these officers?
And I think so, the relationship with a prosecutor who has a grand jury, and normally this grand jury will have heard multiple cases during a period of time for their service. This prosecutor or the prosecutor's office will have a good relationship with this grand jury, and a system of trust is built. Because remember, the defense is not, or any other party is not present to the proceedings of what happens in a grand jury, and generally they remain confidential under most state laws. So what was most telling to me is when the prosecutor had already made up his mind based upon his own independent investigation what his recommendation to the grand jury was going to be. Really, it's no shock at all that that grand jury followed the prosecutor's direction. There's an old silly saying that lawyers say that prosecutors can indict a ham sandwich, and they say it in the sense of really the relationship between the prosecutor and the grand jury is such that the prosecutor really leads the grand jury to where they believe the evidence is going to be and what the outcome should be. Now, it doesn't mean that the grand jury will always deliver a criminal indictment or a no true bill, which means there's no charges. That's happened in this case. But it's pretty telling to me, and it's kind of interesting to me that, according to the prosecutor, he did not have to bring this case to the grand jury. He elected to do it, but made a recommendation to not file. So it seems like it was just a second layer before the community. He was giving the evidence to his folks. They're on the grand jury in their community, and they were going to follow his advice based on what he had already determined. So to me, it's based upon how he presented to it, and I'm not saying it was right or wrong, but based upon how he presented it, it's really no shock that no true bill was filed in this case, and the grand jury followed their recommendation.
You know, Jamie, David brings up an interesting point about the fact that most times grand jury proceedings are secret. We never really hear about that. But in this case, things were different because the Cuyahoga County prosecutor actually went through at various points and released bits of information and reports over the course of this.
I actually went on their website to see how many times pieces of information were released, and there were at least 4 different times that they released to the public and released to reporters exactly what they had presented to the grand jury, which is very unusual. Usually the grand jury proceedings are secret. And in each case, they either ended up giving out materials in terms of paperwork and that kind of thing, their expert witnesses, the surveillance video that was analyzed then